Poor bride marries a blind millionaire, but his wedding gift left everyone speechless. The grand hall stood in stunned silence as the bride, veiled in delicate lace, took her first hesitant step down the aisle. Gasps rippled through the gathered guests, not for the beauty of her dress, but for the man waiting for her at the altar, James Rutherford, the enigmatic blind millionaire whose every decision was cloaked in mystery. The whispers were relentless. Why had he chosen her? A poor village girl, Sofia had nothing to offer a man of his stature. Yet, here she was, dressed in borrowed finery, her trembling hands clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. Each step felt heavier than the last, her heart pounding with the weight of her secret. Was it guilt, or fear of rejection that churned inside her? As she reached the altar, James leaned forward slightly, as if sensing her arrival. His deep voice broke the tension. "You look beautiful, my wife-to-be." His words, warm and unexpected, sent a shiver down her spine. But it wasn't his declaration of affection that would shock everyone. It was his wedding gift, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains at the side of the hall, that would change everything, and leave the room utterly speechless. Sofia was no stranger to hardship. Born into a family of humble means in a small, picturesque village nestled between rolling hills, her childhood was a tapestry of simple joys and relentless struggles. Her father, a once hopeful farmer, had been crushed under the weight of mounting debts after years of poor harvests. Her mother, ever the optimist, worked tirelessly as a seamstress to keep food on the table. Despite their efforts, Sofia often went to bed hungry, her dreams of a better life interwoven with the scent of freshly tilled earth and the hum of her mother's sewing machine. Her beauty, though unpolished, had always drawn attention. The village folk called her the wildflower, for her striking green eyes and untamed chestnut hair. Yet, she had learned early on that beauty was as much a curse as it was a blessing. Many suitors sought her hand, but their intentions were shallow, their proposals tinged with the hope of possessing her rather than loving her. James Rutherford, on the other hand, was an enigma. A self-made millionaire, his fortune was as mysterious as his blindness. Some said he had lost his sight in a tragic accident that claimed his family, while others whispered it was the price he paid for his immense wealth. Despite his disability, his sharp intellect and commanding presence made him a force to be reckoned with. James had built his empire brick by brick, becoming one of the wealthiest men in the country, but his heart remained elusive. When word spread that James was seeking a bride, the news sent ripples through every social circle. It wasn't just a marriage, it was an opportunity to secure wealth, status, and influence. Sofia, urged by desperation and her family's dire financial state, agreed to marry him. She told herself it was for her parents, for her younger brother who needed an education. But deep down, she wondered, had she traded her freedom for a gilded cage? Now, as she stood on the brink of a new life, Sofia wrestled with the uncertainty of her choice and the growing unease about the secrets she carried. For James, his reasons for choosing Sofia were just as enigmatic, veiled in his unseen plans. The air in the grand dining room was thick with tension as James sat across from Sofia for the first time since their engagement had been finalized. The large oak table stretched between them, polished to a mirror shine, its surface reflecting the flickering light of the chandelier above. Sofia's hands rested nervously in her lap, her posture rigid, as though the weight of the occasion had turned her to stone. She had imagined their meeting countless times, yet none of her fantasies prepared her for this moment. James's voice broke the silence, deep and deliberate. "I'm sure you're wondering why I chose you." Sofia's heart raced. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even though his unseeing eyes seemed to pierce right through her. "The thought has crossed my mind," she admitted softly. He leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "I had no interest in marriage until recently. I've spent years building my life on principles of control and precision, ensuring that no one could influence my decisions. But loneliness has a way of eroding even the strongest foundations." The honesty in his words caught Sofia off guard. She had expected formality, perhaps indifference, but not this. James's tone hardened. However, this marriage is not just a remedy for solitude. It's a necessity. He paused, as though weighing how much to reveal. There are forces at play, both within my business and outside of it, that require me to take certain precautions. A wife provides stability and credibility. Protection, even. Sofia's mind raced, piecing together fragments of his explanation. Protection from what? She asked, her voice trembling. James's jaw tightened. Let's just say there are individuals who would exploit any perceived weakness. I need someone I can trust, someone who is loyal, resourceful, and strong. He gestured toward her. You, Sofia, fit the description. Her throat constricted. Was this a compliment, or merely a calculated choice? She wanted to press him, to demand why he had settled on her, a poor village girl when he could have had anyone. But before she could gather the courage, James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He slid it across the table to her. I believe this belongs to you, he said, his voice softening. Sofia hesitated, then opened the box. Nestled inside was a ring, a dazzling emerald set in a band of intricate gold. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and yet it felt like a chain wrapping around her finger. You're free to walk away, James said quietly, his head tilting as if studying her reaction. But if you stay, I'll give you everything you've ever wanted. Security, comfort, and perhaps, in time, something more. Sofia's heart thundered in her chest. She thought of her family, of the debts and dreams waiting back home. Taking a steadying breath, she slid the ring onto her finger. I'll stay, she whispered, though a part of her wondered what price she had truly agreed to pay. The days following the engagement were a whirlwind for Sofia. The Rutherford estate became a hive of activity as preparations for the wedding were underway. Sofia, overwhelmed by the opulence and grandeur surrounding her, found herself swept along in a current she couldn't control. The staff, polite but distant, addressed her as Miss Sofia, with a formality that only heightened her sense of being an outsider in James's world. James, true to his enigmatic nature, was a constant yet elusive presence. He conducted his business from the grand study, his deep voice carrying through the halls as he barked commands over the phone. Sofia observed him from afar, marveling at his sharp mind and commanding demeanor, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that his trust in her was conditional, fragile. It was during one quiet afternoon that Sofia found herself wandering the vast library. The room smelled of aged leather and wood polish, the walls lined with shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly. Her fingers brushed the spines of the books, searching for a distraction, when she came across a peculiar journal tucked behind a row of historical texts. Curiosity piqued, she opened it and was startled to find detailed notes about James's business dealings, accompanied by sketches of unfamiliar faces and cryptic annotations. It's not polite to snoop. Sofia jumped, the journal slipping from her hands. James stood in the doorway, his head tilted slightly as though he could see her reaction despite his blindness. I wasn't snooping, she stammered, hastily closing the journal and placing it back on the shelf. He approached, his movements slow but deliberate. You're not very good at lying, he said, though there was a trace of amusement in his tone. Sofia's cheeks flushed. I didn't mean to pry. I was just curious. James nodded, his expression softening. Curiosity isn't a flaw, Sofia. But some things in this house are best left alone. His words carried an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. Despite the reprimand, James's demeanor toward Sofia began to shift. He started inviting her to sit with him during his evening tea, their conversations delving into topics that ranged from literature to philosophy. She learned that his blindness had been caused by an accident years ago, one he rarely spoke of, and that he'd built his fortune from nothing after being orphaned as a teenager. In return, Sofia shared stories of her family, her village, and her dreams of a simpler life. One evening, as they sat in the drawing room, James surprised her by asking, "Do you regret saying yes?" Sofia looked up from her tea, startled. Regret? He leaned back in his chair, his sightless eyes directed toward her. You had a choice. You could have walked away. But you stayed. Why? Sofia hesitated, unsure how to articulate the storm of emotions that had driven her decision. I did it for my family, she admitted. They've struggled for so long. This marriage means security for them. James nodded, as though her answer confirmed something he already knew. And for yourself? Her throat tightened. I'm not sure yet. He studied her for a moment, then said, You're stronger than you think, Sofia. Don't let anyone, not even me, make you feel otherwise. His words lingered with her long after the conversation ended. For the first time, she wondered if James saw more in her than she saw in herself. As the wedding day approached, Sofia's unease grew. Strange occurrences began to unsettle her. She overheard hushed conversations between James's staff, their words cryptic and hurried. Papers on James's desk referenced threats to his business empire, and on more than one occasion, she caught glimpses of unfamiliar men lingering near the estate's gates. When she asked James about it, he dismissed her concerns with a reassuring smile, but the tension in his jaw told another story. Then came the package. It arrived one evening, a plain brown parcel left on the doorstep. The housekeeper handed it to James, who opened it in the privacy of his study. Sofia, passing by the slightly ajar door, caught sight of his expression as he read the letter inside. His usual composure cracked, his face darkening with an emotion she couldn't place. James, she ventured cautiously. He looked up sharply, his features hardening. It's nothing. Just business. But Sofia knew it was more than that. Later that night, she crept into the study and found the letter discarded in the fireplace, its edges singed but still legible. The words chilled her to the bone. You can't hide forever. We're watching. The wedding day arrived in a blur of activity. Sofia barely registered the meticulous arrangements or the lavish decorations that transformed the estate into a scene from a fairy tale. Her mind was consumed by the letter, by James's increasingly guarded behavior, and by the gnawing sense that she was stepping into something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. As she walked down the aisle, her gaze locked on James. He stood tall and composed, his hands clasped in front of him, but she could see the strain in his posture. When she reached him, his fingers brushed hers, a fleeting touch that grounded her amidst the chaos swirling in her mind. Are you ready? He asked softly. Sofia hesitated, her eyes searching his face. Are you? For the briefest moment, James's mask slipped. Not entirely, he admitted. But together, we might be. Their vows were exchanged, their union sealed with a kiss, and the room erupted in applause. But as the guests celebrated, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that their story was only beginning, and that the shadows lurking at the edges of James's world were about to converge on them both. The night of the wedding reception shimmered with celebration. Guests mingled beneath glittering chandeliers, their laughter filling the grand hall. Sofia moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her lips smiling though her mind raced. The letter she had found in James's study lingered in her thoughts, a quiet storm brewing amidst the festivities. James stood near the center of the room, surrounded by well-wishers. Even amid the revelry, his posture was tense, his sightless eyes turning toward subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Sofia noticed it immediately, his hand tightened on the champagne flute he held, his lips pressing into a thin line. Something was wrong. Then, it happened. The grand doors at the far end of the hall burst open, slamming against the walls with a resounding echo that silenced the crowd. A tall man strode in, his presence commanding and sharp. His tailored suit was immaculate, but there was a coiled menace in his stride. The room seemed to shrink around him. James Rutherford, the man called, his voice carrying effortlessly over the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. You didn't think you could hide forever, did you? James set down his glass with deliberate calm. Richard, he replied, his voice as cold as the winter wind. I was wondering when you'd show your face. Sofia's heart pounded as the tension in the room thickened. She edged closer to James, her instincts screaming to stay by his side. And who is this? Richard's gaze flicked to Sofia, his eyes narrowing. The bride? How quaint. Did she agree to this farce, or is she another pawn in your endless game? Sofia stepped forward before James could answer, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. Who are you, and what do you want? Richard smirked, his eyes gleaming with malice. I'm the man your husband betrayed. The one he left in ruins to climb his way to the top. James's jaw tightened, his composure slipping. That's enough, Richard. Is it? Richard's voice rose, his anger barely restrained. You think a new wife and a grand wedding can wash away your sins? You think you can build an empire on the backs of those you've destroyed and face no consequences? The room buzzed with unease, guests shifting uncomfortably as the weight of Richard's accusations filled the space. James took a step forward, his tone low and dangerous. I've made mistakes, but I won't let you use this night to settle your grievances. Leave, Richard, before you do something you'll regret. Richard's laughter was sharp, like glass shattering. Oh, I won't regret anything tonight, James. His hand moved swiftly, pulling a pistol from inside his jacket. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he raised it, the barrel aimed directly at James. No! Sofia cried, stepping between them before anyone could stop her. Her arms spread wide, shielding James with her own body. Please, don't do this. Richard hesitated, his expression flickering with surprise. Step aside, he growled. This isn't about you. Maybe not, Sofia said, her voice trembling but resolute. But it's about more than revenge. Do you want justice? This isn't the way to get it. Don't let his mistakes define who you are. For a moment, the room held its breath. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring as Richard's finger hovered over the trigger. His jaw clenched, the storm in his eyes warring with her words. Finally, with a growl of frustration, he lowered the weapon. You're lucky, he spat at James. But this isn't over. Turning on his heel, he strode out of the hall, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Sofia turned to James, her legs trembling beneath her. His hands found hers, steadying her. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, I did, she replied, her eyes meeting his. I'm your wife. We face this together. James's expression softened, and for the first time that night, a hint of gratitude and admiration flickered across his face. Around them, the guests began to murmur again, the tension in the room slowly dissipating. But Sofia knew this was only the beginning. Whatever shadows haunted James's past, they would face them together, no matter the cost. The days following the wedding were marked by a profound stillness at the Rutherford estate. The grand hall, once filled with music and laughter, now seemed cloaked in a reflective silence. Sofia sat on the terrace overlooking the sprawling gardens, her thoughts a tangled web of fear, determination, and hope. James joined her, his presence quiet yet grounding. He took a seat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. I owe you the truth, he began, his voice steady but tinged with regret. Sofia turned to him, her gaze unwavering. I think I deserve that, James. With a deep breath, James began to unravel the complexities of his past. He told her about his former business partner, Richard, and the betrayal that had ended their relationship. I made decisions I'm not proud of, he admitted, his fingers tightening around hers. But Richard wasn't innocent either. We both let ambition cloud our judgment. When I tried to cut ties, he saw it as a betrayal and swore to ruin me. Sofia listened intently, her heart heavy with the weight of his confession. Why didn't you tell me this before? She asked softly. Because I didn't want to burden you, James replied. This marriage was meant to be a fresh start for both of us. I thought I could keep my past from touching you, but I was wrong. Sofia's mind reeled with the implications of his words. Yet, as she looked at James, she saw not a man consumed by power, but someone who was willing to confront his mistakes. "We'll face it together," she said firmly. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it as partners." James's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of vulnerability in his eyes. "You are far braver than I deserve, Sofia." The next few weeks were a flurry of action. James's legal team worked tirelessly to address the threats Richard had posed, while Sofia immersed herself in learning about James's business empire. Though she had never imagined herself stepping into such a world, she found a surprising strength within. Her insight and practicality proved invaluable, earning the respect of James's staff. One evening, as they reviewed documents in the study, James leaned back in his chair, watching Sofia as she carefully went over a contract. "You've become quite the strategist," he remarked with a faint smile. Sofia looked up, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I've had a good teacher," she replied. Their partnership extended beyond business. Sofia insisted on reopening communication with the people of the estate, ensuring that James's employees felt valued and heard. Slowly, the heavy atmosphere began to lift, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and purpose. Richard's threats, however, loomed in the background. One morning, a package arrived at the estate containing legal documents demanding an arbitration over James's assets. Sofia, unshaken, urged James to face the situation head-on. "He wants you to falter," she said, her tone resolute. "Show him you're stronger than he believes." With Sofia's unwavering support, James confronted Richard in a court-mediated session. The legal battle was tense and grueling, but Sofia's insights into the evidence, paired with James's determination, turned the tide in their favor. By the end, Richard's claims were dismissed, and his threats of retaliation lost their power. As the storm passed, life at the Rutherford estate began to settle into a new rhythm. The shared trials had forged an unbreakable bond between James and Sofia. She had stepped out of the shadows of doubt and into the light of her strength, while James had learned to lean on someone other than himself. One evening, as they stood on the terrace watching the sun dip below the horizon, James reached for Sofia's hand. "You saved me, you know," he said, his voice quiet but filled with emotion. Sofia smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I think we saved each other." The garden below was alive with the colors of blooming flowers, a testament to renewal and growth. For the first time in years, James felt a profound sense of peace, and Sofia, once a girl from a humble village, felt truly at home. Their story had been one of secrets and trials, but it had also become a story of partnership, resilience, and love. Together, they faced the future with hearts unburdened and spirits united, ready to build a life that was no longer shadowed by the past but illuminated by the promise of tomorrow.